In the previous episode, Arthur encountered a giant dragon named Sylvia. Despite her scary appearance, Sylvia showed her mellow side to Arthur, making sure to teach the protagonist everything she knew. However, a dragon similar to her appearance arrived at the cave. To save Arthur, Sylvia stopped time and opened to help Arthur escape as the protagonist was transported to a forest. The Beginning After the End, Episode 4, titled Saved by the King, was released on Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. The episode saw Arthur Leywin save an elf girl from a group of bandits who wanted to sell her off as a slave. The young girl, who later introduced herself as Tessia Eralith, belonged to the land of the elves, Elenoir. However, she mentioned that she didn't know the way back to her home. That's why the beginning. After the End, Episode 4 saw Arthur accompany Tessia to find the Elenoir kingdom. The thick forest of Elsha provided a stiff challenge to Arthur, but he pushed along. Undoubtedly, the episode had the elements of adventure and a fantastical vibe. Picking up the events from the previous installment, The Beginning After the End, Episode 4 commences with Arthur Leywin venturing deep into the woods after hearing the shrill cry of a young girl. After stealthily approaching the voice, he sees a group of bandits taking an elven girl to a carriage to sell her in the slave market. Arthur then overhears one of the bandits asking their boss whether they have hit the jackpot. The boss replies that the elf girl will fetch them a lot of money. Suddenly, Arthur remembers his horrific experience with the bandits. He's almost consumed by rage as he wants to eliminate the enemies before him. However, the boy suddenly recalls Sylvia's wise words about how one shouldn't show haste in anger. Therefore, he decides to follow the bandits instead and bide his time. He wants to see if he can find the human settlement nearby. The Beginning After the End, Episode 4, then shows Arthur concentrating on his mana while waiting for the bandits to make their move. The sun sets, and the night sky envelopes the deep forest, where Arthur Leywin keenly focuses on his enemies. Interestingly, he notices a pack of wild hounds, chained with mana. According to The Beginning. After the End, Episode 4, those mana-fused chains have tamed those wild beasts. At this moment in the beginning, after the End, Episode 4, Arthur decides to take the offensive route. At first, he uses a few pebbles to rouse the hounds. Hearing the beasts howling, one of the bandits appears. Suddenly, Arthur leaps from the tree and slashes at the bandit with his mana. The Beginning. After the End, Episode 4 shows Arthur Leywin's fury as he decimates the bandits one by one. Finally, he faces the boss, who wants to capture Arthur alive and sell him for a good fortune. However, Arthur weaves a fascinating strategy to plunge a knife into the man's forehead. After eliminating the bandits, Arthur approaches the carriage and frees the young elven girl. The boy assures the elven girl that it's safe outside now and that she can return home. However, the girl is more curious about Arthur's well-being. In fact, she asks him what happened to her kidnappers. Arthur quickly covers the corpses with sheets and tells the elf girl that kids shouldn't see something like this. Interestingly, the elf girl reminds Arthur that he's a child too. Nevertheless, Arthur wants to head back and reunite with his parents. However, he discovers that the elf girl has lost her way while chasing some bugs. As a result, she doesn't know how far the bandits have brought her. While Arthur thinks it's slightly unreasonable, he supposes that's what children are typically like. At this moment, The Beginning. After the End, Episode 4 teases King Gray's past, where he seems confined in a large room with only a window. He realizes that he cannot leave the child alone. Just then, Arthur notices the hounds and wonders what to do with them. The elven girl says they should set them free. Although Arthur thinks it's a bad idea, the young girl reminds them that they were only used by the bad guys. The elf girl's kindness brings a smile to Arthur's face as he decides to find her home. The Beginning. After the End, Episode 4 then shows Arthur Leywin embarking on a journey with the elven girl, who introduces herself as Tessia Eralith. After traversing the thick Elsha forest for a while, Arthur and Tessia stop by a rather safe area to have some food. However, Tessia doesn't like Arthur's prepared food as she wants something sweet. At this moment, she strikes up a conversation with Arthur and asks him why he has come to the forest of Elshire. The boy says that he has gotten separated from his family. Likewise, Arthur asks Tessia about the land of the elves, Elenoir. The elf girl reveals that it's a fascinating place. She adds that her parents are mostly busy, so she spends a lot of time with her grandfather and caretakers. Meanwhile, Arthur realizes that the trip to Elenoir is taking longer than he anticipated. At this moment in the beginning after the end episode 4, Tessia plays with a few glowing bugs. When Arthur inquires her about it, she asks the boy whether he wants one. Arthur wonders if that's how children usually play. Meanwhile, Tessia reveals that she looks forward to training at her master's place once her mana awakens. Arthur realizes that the elves don't go through organized education, but they get assigned a master. While strolling through the forest, Arthur senses one of the hounds following them. However, he remains calm. Meanwhile, at night, Arthur decides to stay on guard outside their tent. Yet, Tessia wants the boy inside the tent because she's scared of ghosts. Even though she doesn't outright reveal her fear, she implies it through her behavior. Inside the tent, Tessia talks about the human kingdom with Arthur. She recalls hearing somewhere that all human men are perverts who have many wives. Arthur explains that it's usually certain aristocrats. He adds that there must be many pervert elves in her kingdom as well. Interestingly, Tessia falls asleep before she can discuss it further. The beginning after the end, episode 4, then shows Arthur and Tessia recommencing their journey to the Elenoir. The former realizes that the elf girl has become more comfortable around him. Arthur wants to find her home soon, so that he can return to his parents. Yet, suddenly, he's struck with a sharp pain in his chest. He wonders what it's all about. At this moment, Arthur sees the hound from before. The beast drops a dead pig in front of Arthur and leaves. When Arthur asks Tessia about it, she mentions that the hound has probably repaid them for saving its life. At night, Arthur and Tessia cook a sumptuous meal. The boy realizes that children do need meat for nourishment. The next day, Arthur and Tessia resume their journey and reach a glowing tree. Tessia's eyes widen with relief since it's the portal to the land of the elves, Elenoir. In the post-credit scene, the beginning after the end episode 4 shows Arthur and Tessia being teleported to the elven land. However, the guards apprehend Arthur. Interestingly, Tessia bears a conflicted expression on her face. The episode ends with Arthur wondering whether he has fallen into a trap. One of the major highlights of the beginning after the end episode 4 was Arthur Leywin's unique chemistry with Tessia, the elven girl whom he saved from the kidnappers. Tessia's vibrant personality was a nice contrast to Arthur's somber and more serious demeanor. Animation-wise, the episode was slightly subpar. That said, from a narrative point of view, the episode has nicely set up Arthur's next challenge. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epis.